see I have a problem. In a relationship, I feel sex is a part of a relationship.
Who can't keep a job, stay faithful, or please a woman, is a serial adulterer who even cheated on you on Valentine's Day, resulted in the birth of her 9-month-old son, Corbin. Ms. Fetters, you say your husband is an irresponsible crybaby.
Well, today, Your Honor, I ended up in court because my wife is a cheater. She had informed me that she had slept with my family member. Yes.
And then you make her your wife?
Not until 2.5, 3 years later did I ask her to marry me.
Oh.
He just thinks something happens. He has no hard facts.
I had to pry the information as to why she was wanting to leave me in the first place, and come to find out she had actually slept with her ex-husband.
I'm not a liar. I'm very, very honest. So when I left that night, he knew where I was because he tried to hunt me down but couldn't find me.
So wait, you go to the movies and have a good date night, and by the end, you're in the bed with your ex-husband?
Yeah, he didn't want...
The courtroom of Judge Lauren Lake begins not with shouting, but with the thick weight of consequence. The parties are not merely battling biology. They are battling identity, legality, testimony, podcasts that turn their tragedies into lessons, and the lifelong collision between law and justice. What unfolds is not a scene of dramatic chaos, but a legal autopsy of relationships, responsibilities, and the delicate bridge between the concept of justice in jurisprudence and the lived reality of parenthood, betrayal, cheating allegations, DNA test people regret taking, and contested truth. Here, there are no dramatic montages, only recorded legal declarations, sworn intent, and the precise unraveling of stories that began in private beds and ended on the evidence stage in divorce case proceedings, co-parenting hearings, child support orders, and appeals where the Supreme Court child support precedent quietly sits as the silent doctrine above them. Judge Lauren Lake addresses both parties with a measured clarity. She has seen this pattern before. Couples who believed that emotional love was enough to stabilize parenthood, spouses who thought loyalty could erase indiscretions, mothers who feared the courtroom because a DNA test might rewrite family identity, and fathers who either demanded testing or begged the court not to test at all. This moment is a careful legal description, not a reenactment. The judge's authority is not rooted in threat, but in the expectation that all parties must finally tell the truth, regardless of who regrets requesting scientific confirmation. What unfolds is a meticulous articulation of paternity disputes, conflicting dates, unsent messages, admitted cheating, denied intercourse, and emotional testimonies that could easily be episodes on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, the Divorce Course podcast, or testimonial features like Celebrate Recovery Testimonies, because every person in the room has lived consequences that extend beyond one hearing. The alleged father stands with rigid posture, explaining that he never believed he could be the biological father, insisting that physical contact did not reach legal definition of intercourse. His denial is rule-based, scientific, and aimed to block any attempt at compulsory testing. Yet biological probability, behavioral evidence, private communication records, and timing align in a way that makes courtroom dismissal impossible. Meanwhile, the mother provides systematic explanation of conception timelines, emotional isolation, parental fear, and the internal battle between wanting peace and needing answers. She explains in steady form how the child deserves biological clarity, not because she wants retribution, but because adverse inference in evidence act logic applies. When one party resists testing, the law can infer implications. Judge Lauren Lake explains the legal standard with direct judicial tone. She notes that emotional memory is not evidence, denial is not proof, pain is not legal posture, and regret is not DNA. She clarifies how testimony becomes framework, how medical documentation becomes foundation, how social media messages become podcast evidence fodder. She explains that in paternity jurisprudence, the relationship between law and justice is not symbolic, but operational. The law determines duty, but justice determines restoration. Some individuals in this courtroom requested testing only to later panic, because once results enter the record, they become permanent and administratively binding. Truth changes everything, and that is why many litigants privately dread reaching this stage. The defendant's spouse is also present, not as adversary but as witness. She describes her understanding of events, her belief that her husband would not lie, and her plea that marriage should not collapse under biological revelation. This is not a dramatic accusation exchange. It is controlled testimony mediated by judicial authority. The mother, too, clarifies her own fear. She grew up without knowing her biological parent until late adolescence, and she cannot allow her child to live in similar uncertainty. Her reply is not delivered with emotional explosions, but with legal articulation. She wants the next generation to have clarity, identity, and accurate lineage. Judge Lauren Lake calmly explains what many DNA test cheating stories fail to address. A DNA test does not merely label biology. It rearranges legal rights, visitation schedules, child support obligations, inheritance, adoption eligibility, and long-term identity records. Misunderstood intimacy, overlapping relationships, and blurred timelines are not moral scandals here. They are legal determinants. Even adoption stories' full episodes become relevant, because paternity testing affects future adoptive rights if the biological father contests placement later in life. When the court orders testing, the parties comply under judicial supervision. The judge repeats that science is not emotional confirmation, it is legal truth. The lab is not a villain nor a rescuer, it is a neutral instrument. In this setting, every litigant privately considers whether their request will become regret, because DNA test people regret taking is not a meme. It is a real psychological category in family law. Once truth is returned in numeric probability, no one can withdraw, reverse, or emotionally edit what becomes certified record. When the results return, Judge Lauren Lake reopens court. She does not begin with theatrics but with structured evaluation, parental hopes, responsibility expectations, and willingness to co-raise respectfully despite conflict. The alleged father admits fear not of biology but of responsibility. He states that if the child is legally his, he will meet obligations with steadiness. He denies remembering intercourse, but not the possibility that biology may contradict memory. Meanwhile, the mother acknowledges her own past secrecy, not for manipulation, but to avoid confusion for the child. She explains that she did not want multiple father figures appearing in and out of a minor's emotional field. Judge Lauren Lake describes how evidence, not volume, wins hearings. She explains that the child is not a prop, not a bargaining chip, not a symbol of betrayal, but a legal citizen with rights. Testing concludes and scientific result becomes the decisive moment. The percentage is absolute, and with that percentage, parental identity is lawfully defined. The courtroom does not erupt, it absorbs. Everyone present realizes that podcast narratives, cheating rumors, emotional recollections, and shame cannot alter genetic mathematics. In the aftermath, Judge Lauren Lake gives measured guidance. She reminds the parties that justice is not emotional satisfaction, it is righteous structure. She emphasizes that co-parenting must begin not in resentment, but in regulated peace. The father is instructed that denial must end because legal recognition begins now. The mother is instructed that transparency must continue because the child's emotional stability depends upon future clarity, not historical secrecy. The judge alerts both that further disputes, if escalated, will lead to structured custody review, medical access stipulations, and public sharing restrictions. There is no sensational applause, no dramatic camera sweep, only signatures, recorded facts, and a child's future protected by judicial protocol and biological certainty. After the results are confirmed and recorded, the atmosphere in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom does not lighten. It deepens. The legal gravity has shifted. The man who once insisted that testing was unnecessary now finds himself declared the biological father. The shift is not symbolic. His role is no longer rhetorical, emotional, or contested. It is legally classified, permanently documented, and bureaucratically enforceable. This second phase is where truth changes everything, not by shock but by administrative certainty. The courtroom now transitions from establishing identity to defining obligation. Judge Lauren Lake calmly reorients both parties toward the next legal chapter: child support determination, co-parenting agreements, holiday scheduling, and future medical authorization rights. She explains that paternity confirmation is not a finale. It is the procedural opening of parenthood responsibilities. The judge states that this hearing now connects directly to judicial standards often referenced in Supreme Court child support cases. Once biological identity is proven, the system must ensure financial and emotional responsibility is not merely suggested but enforceable. The father, still insistently claiming memory disconnect, is informed that recollection does not supersede DNA. He stands quietly, no longer objecting, because denial is no longer an active legal option. In paternity law, emotional disbelief does not constitute legal evidence. Judge Lauren Lake clarifies that the adverse inference in Evidence Act principle existed earlier, but now inference is no longer relevant because scientific clarity has replaced speculation. What remains is administrative duty. Simultaneously, the mother expresses relief, not triumph, not satisfaction, simply relief. She explains how long she has waited not for confrontation but for stability. She does not request celebration, she requests structure. She articulates that she grew up without her biological parent and refused to allow her child to inherit that same void. Her reflection resembles testimonies often featured on Celebrate recovery platforms, not because she is recounting addiction or broken faith, but because she is describing generational repair. Legal paternity is the beginning of emotional healing, not weaponry. Judge Lauren Lake now explains the implications of true legal confirmation. The child will have clear access to medical history, paternal identity, inheritance eligibility, and legal acknowledgement. These elements are not sentimental, they are statutory. She explains that if multiple father figures or uncertain narratives had remained active, the child's psychological development risked confusion, future anxiety, and parental identity fragmentation. Now the court's role transitions from discovery to stabilization. The father, upon hearing this, shifts from defensive posture to cautious acceptance. He admits that he felt fear, not of biology but of responsibility and judgment. He explains how social conversations, DNA test cheating stories, and podcast narratives like the Divorce Course podcast and the Game-Changing Attorney podcast often portray fathers either as villains or victims. He never wanted to be publicly miscast. This confession is not shouting, it is legal disclosure. Judge Lauren Lake does not react emotionally. She responds with legal grounding. Fatherhood is not a punishment but a legal role. At this stage, the mother begins discussing future expectations. She clarifies that she does not seek retaliation, unmanageable financial demands, or emotional imprisonment through obligation. She seeks shared responsibility, reasonable visitation, and respectful co-parenting boundaries. She states that, moving forward, this will not be a platform for bitterness nor an extended performance of who did what in past years. Instead, clarity allows closure. Truth provides direction. Judge Lauren Lake notes that in many adoption stories' full episodes, the absence of biological identity becomes an emotional wound later in adulthood. She states that legal systems now emphasize preserving truth early, because later correction becomes psychologically destabilizing. If identity is withheld, the individual must reconstruct themselves retroactively. This child will not face that. Biological truth is secured before school enrollment, before teenager identity crises, before adulthood documentation. As the courtroom transitions, Judge Lauren Lake also addresses how podcast culture has reframed legal misunderstanding. She mentions that viral storytelling often dramatizes DNA outcomes yet rarely covers the procedural aftermath. Child support filings, scheduling orders, custody movements, therapy recommendations, and legal parenting plans. Here, the court is not a story generator, it is a life stabilizer. The father expresses a desire to meet the child, but requests a structured introduction, acknowledging that emotional connection must match developmental readiness. The judge agrees and outlines stages. It is not spontaneous nor unmediated. The introduction will follow a plan recommended by family guidance professionals to ensure peaceful transition. This is not a narrative arc. It is a legal protection of childhood emotional security. Judge Lauren Lake instructs that both parents must speak about each other with respect in front of the child. She clarifies that co-parenting is not a friendship or reconciliation. It is an administrative partnership centered on the minor's well-being. She warns against weaponizing visitation, using affection as leverage, or interpreting responsibility as personal victory. The mother acknowledges this with quiet strength. She explains that the child deserves stability, not shifting narratives. She states that she wants her son to grow with accurate knowledge, not whispered contradictions. She has no interest in revisiting the heated past, and she requests that the father also release defensiveness. Legal identity is established. Emotional warfare must end. The father admits internal conflict but accepts responsibility. He expresses that parenthood now feels real, not hypothetical. He understands that while memory, timing, and relationship confusion may remain unresolved in adult minds, the child's future must not be shaped by those uncertainties. He accepts that fatherhood is a factual role, not a philosophical exercise. Judge Lauren Lake concludes that this case now moves into the long-term legal arc. Structured payments, documented visitation, and behavioral guidelines. She reminds both parents that legal paternity is not the end of this court's potential involvement. It is merely the part where the system introduces ongoing oversight to protect the minor. If future disputes arise, the court will intervene not for parents' grievances, but for the child's rights. She reiterates the foundational truth. The relationship between law and justice is not always emotional alignment, but procedural fairness. The law has now spoken, and justice is the structured environment that follows. The courtroom adjourns not with applause, but with signatures on official paternity acknowledgement papers, child support administration forms, and future hearing dates. The final emotional reflection is not melodrama, it is acceptance. All individuals return to their lives with certified truth in hand, proof that whatever uncertainty once existed is now resolved. Private regret, confusion, doubt, and podcast speculation fade. Only responsibility remains. This chapter ends with parenthood legally defined, childhood protected, and truth recorded in permanent judicial language. The courtroom has already delivered its greatest verdict, Yet Judge Lauren Lake understands that the aftermath of proven paternity is where real transformation begins. The DNA answer, simple in percentage but vast in consequence, has removed every shield, every denial, every emotional deflection. Now the question is not who the father is, but how both parents will legally and responsibly step into the ongoing structure that follows. The truth has been spoken, documented, stamped, and entered into the legal archive. There is no more avoidance. Truth changes everything, and today, everything becomes about building, not arguing. Judge Lauren Lake makes this explicitly clear before final adjournment. She reminds both parties that while earlier hearings focused on identity, now the focus is the child's continuous life. Scheduled parenting time, guaranteed financial support, medical decision-making, educational involvement, and stability. The judge emphasizes that the legal system does not care about emotional discomfort when biological truth has been established. It cares about the child's right to a predictable upbringing. In this phase, the courtroom shifts from confrontation to regulation. The mother appears calmer than in any prior moment. With identity confirmed, she no longer carries the weight of uncertainty. She states plainly that although this case began with contested memory, disagreements about intimacy, and conflicting timelines, the resolution is clear. The child will have an acknowledged father, a recorded lineage, and no lingering question of biological origin. She expresses that what she wants now is not vindication, not victory, but parental order. After living years without clarity, she knows firsthand how psychological identity impacts self-worth. Her position now aligns fully with what family law aims to protect: continuity, not conflict. The father, though initially resistant, now stands with the understanding that denial is no longer part of his legal vocabulary. His role is no longer a possibility. It is a duty. Judge Lauren Lake states firmly that biological identity acknowledged in court is inseparable from legal obligation. The administrative framework that follows includes support calculations, record updates reflecting legal paternity, and systems that ensure neither parent can use silence, avoidance, or personal conflict to jeopardize the child's needs. The judge clarifies that this structure is not punitive. It is protective. This case also becomes a formal representation of what podcasts and legal commentary often examine when discussing the relationship between law and justice. Justice is not merely the revelation of DNA. It is the enforcement of what DNA demands afterward. Law provides the procedural skeleton. Justice fills in the living consequence that the child relies upon. In the game-changing Attorney podcast and the Divorce Course podcast, similar tragedies of uncertainty, betrayal, and confusion are often dissected. But those platforms rarely address the quieter aftermath, the administrative calm that follows emotional storms. Judge Lauren Lake highlights a legal truth often ignored in DNA test people regret taking stories. Sometimes, the regret does not come from the result, but from what the result requires afterward. Not regret because truth is unwelcome, but because truth forces life into permanent accountability. This father now recognizes that responsibility isn't optional. Even if memory fails him, duty will not. The court has established paternity. Therefore, society, through legal mechanism, will enforce fatherhood. The mother acknowledges that had she continued in silence, the child's identity would have remained fractured. Without legal recognition, the child's future medical assessments, inheritance rights, and psychological grounding would forever be incomplete. She explains that her pursuit of testing was not revenge. It was foundation. In Celebrate Recovery Testimonies, many adults describe their pain as starting in childhood from the absence of identity, not just absence of love. She refuses to allow her son to grow within that vacuum. Judge Lauren Lake then describes how the law protects children not only at birth, but decades later when record clarity matters in education files, employment background checks, military eligibility, adoption processing, and more. Even adoption stories' full episodes show that legal truth has lifelong reach. Without this ruling, the child could one day face documentation questions with no verified biological chain. Now there will be no such confusion, no blank lines, no fabricated information. The father begins to express acceptance not merely as acknowledgement but as commitment. He states that while the truth arrived through unwelcome tension, he chooses to move forward without hostility. The judge explains that parental cooperation is not emotional harmony but functional agreement. Co-parenting requires boundaries, communication schedules, non-hostile exchanges, and child-first language. She warns both parents that conversations centered around accusation, betrayal, or blame are not only unproductive, but can legally jeopardize custody if they harm the child's emotional environment. Judge Lauren Lake also clarifies that adverse inference in Evidence Act logic no longer applies because all evidence is finalized. Nothing remains to be inferred. Everything is confirmed. The only remaining task is compliance and consistency. The courtroom is no longer a stage of emotional memory contradiction. It is a maintenance chamber for childhood stability. As the session nears conclusion, Judge Lake revisits an often overlooked truth in paternity jurisprudence. Justice is not a feeling of fairness. It is an execution of duty. Many litigants enter thinking that DNA will solve everything when, in fact, DNA only begins everything. Now begins counseling considerations, schedule transitions, financial planning, parenting agreements, and the full application of Supreme Court child support principles. These are not penalties, they are protections. The father finally asks how he may begin introduction and presence in the child's life without destabilizing the child. The judge responds with clarity. Supervised arrangement first, gradual presence, consistent routine, no emotional upheaval commentary, no conflict in front of the child. The introduction will be constructed and deliberate, not rushed. The parents accept this, not as punishment but as maturation. Even as today's case concludes, Judge Lauren Lake reminds them both that this courtroom will remain an available mechanism should co-parenting break down. They are not alone, but they are responsible. Paternity secured means accountability secured. Financial support will be calculated. Medical access will be shared. Educational rights will be joint. And emotional guidance must be careful. The mother expresses gratitude not for winning but for completion. She states that silence has ended, doubt has ended, and fragments have ended. Now her child will never have to wonder, never have to question, never have to grow beneath the shadow of incomplete lineage. She is not celebrating against the father. She is celebrating for the child. The father breathes deeply and acknowledges that although truth arrived with discomfort, it has also arrived with clarity. He can now step forward not as a possibility, but as a parent. Whatever happened in memory, whatever confusion lingered, whatever resistance preceded this moment, none of it matters more than the child's right to identity. Judge Lauren Lake finalizes with her core principle. When evidence, science, and law align, justice is not loud. It is steady. The hearing does not end in applause, cameras, or narrative tension. It ends with quiet signatures, legal acknowledgement, and the child's future finally supported by both biological truth and judicial order. The courtroom empties, not in celebration but in responsibility. The case is legally resolved. The child is protected, and the narrative closes not with uncertainty but with verified identity, judicial stability, and lawful clarity.